I believe, and I have seen, most leaders overinvest in their underperformers and underinvest in their overperformers.
What would we be looking for to identify that somebody's a low performer?
Yeah, there's a very specific framework that I've created that I use that I call the talent density framework. There are two components of the model I use. One is productivity, and the other is culture fit.
Okay.
So
what's the balance, right? Is if you give me some numbers here of we don't want to be too far negative, 80% you've still got more work to be able to do. What should we be looking for?
So the key is not there's some magic number of you need a talent density indicator of 50%, that ought to be the goal. The key is to keep improving. I could say, thank God for Phil. He's doing great. I don't have to worry about him. I can focus on my problem children over there. That is not how you want to be treated. And by the way, that's not how I'm creating a great company.
We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-part process about how we can have tough conversations with underperformers. You want to know what it is?
Whoever said that, other than you, brilliant.
Just listen to what you said. So Mike, why is it that so many teams full of best intentions end up failing?
You've got to be honest with yourself about it and start with the facts. Be vulnerable enough to ask for help.
It's a surrender to the right people.
Yeah, it's not just about making sure you're sitting down to let them know they're doing a great job. The whole point of it is, let's talk about what's next.
That's where we get to here, right? So Mike, why is it that so many teams full of best intentions end up failing?
I think the major reason, the two major reasons they end up failing is one is focused on communication and alignment, and we can dig deeper into that. And the other, frankly, is there are low performers, whether it's from a productivity standpoint or from a lack of culture fit standpoint, too many low performers that are allowed to stick around on teams, bringing everybody down for way too long. Okay.
How often do you see that happen?
I see that happen with all of my clients. Some are better than others, but I have seen the story about a CEO that I started working with, and from before I started working with him, he said, Mike, when we start working together, and we haven't even signed a deal yet, he said, when we start working together, you and I are going to have to talk about my CFO. Man, I got a real problem there. And I said, it sounds like you know the answer. What do we need to talk about? And he said, I get it. Yeah, you're right. But, we're raising money. We're talking to some banks. You can't fire a CFO when you're raising money. And I thought, I'm not sure that's true, but okay. And then 3 months later, it was, we've got too much going on. We've got to wait. I know. It went about 1.5 years before the guy finally made a move. And man, in that 1.5 years, that not only did the finance team just get buried and all the best people left, but the impact it had on the rest of the organization was incredible. And I see it all the time. It's not that low performers are allowed to stick around for 3 months and they should be gone in one month. There's folks that are around for quarter after quarter, year after year, bringing the team down, and there's always an excuse why it's not the right time.
Okay. So low performers, how do you identify a low performer? Because everybody has more to give, right? There's always a higher ceiling that people can reach for. What would we be looking for to identify that somebody's a low performer?
Yeah, there's a very specific framework that I've created that I use that I call the talent density framework. And on it, you're looking at performance.
Okay.
That's not a shock. But most people equate performance and productivity.
Okay.
And performance is about a lot more than productivity. There are two components of the model I use. One is productivity, and the other is culture fit.
Okay.
So the way you understand who is a low performer versus a high performer is if you've got someone who is very high in productivity, very high in culture fit, not rocket science, those are your high performers. If you've got someone who is living your culture, they're doing well, but they're really low in productivity, I call those folks low producing. But then you've got the other set of folks, which is where most people make mistakes, is you've got folks who are not living the culture, that are making the people around them worse. And in that case, although there are two components, productivity and culture fit, I don't care about productivity. Someone could be a 10 out of 10 in productivity. If they are not living your culture and making the people around you worse, they're toxic to your organization.
How many toxic people do you see in an organization, right? If there's 100 people in a company, What are you seeing typically when you start working with somebody as to the amount of toxicity?
Yeah, obviously, it's not only very different for very different organizations. Some are doing a better job, some worse job, but it's also very different because of the expectations they put on people. Some leaders are really setting a high bar for folks. And other leaders are, have expectations that are very low, and you get what you tolerate. So very often when I start working with a client, there's actually a calculation I use that I've created called the talent density indicator, which is your percent of low performers minus your percent of high performers minus your percent low performers. And anything under 0 is not very good. It means you've got more low performers than high performers. And very often when I start working with a client and finally get them to set expectations in a specific way and in a way that they're not tolerating underperformance, they might be negative. They might have more low performers than high performers, or they may have a real low number, but there's always work to do, right? If they are if they've got a talent density indicator of negative 20%, which means they've got a bunch more low performers than high performers, they don't have to wonder why they're not growing. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, there are some organizations I go into and 80% of their folks are high performing. That doesn't mean they don't have work to do. Number one, if 80% of your folks are considered high performing, typically, it's because you're setting too low a bar.
Okay.
That's a very high number, and it's wonderful if you can do it, but it's too low a bar. But even if you don't have too low a bar, what I typically find, if you've got someone who's high performing, they're a 10 out of 10 in productivity, a 10 out of 10 in culture, they're doing great. The work you've got to do is you've got to challenge them. I've seen more high-performing folks, I've seen more superstars leave out of boredom than anything else. And by the way, what's one of the best ways to take care of your superstars is to deal with the underperformers that you're leaving around.
So what's the balance, right? Is if you give me some numbers here of, we don't want to be too far negative, 80% you've still got more work to be able to do. Like what should we be looking for? Let's take a team of 10 people. Like what's the mix of high performers to low performers?
First, I'd say what you're looking for is improvement. Okay. That's more important. More important than me telling you, well, what you want to look for is, 60% high performers and 20% mediocre performers and then 20% low performers. Again, the number is going to depend on how fast you're growing, your level of expectations for folks. So the key is not there's some magic number of you need a talent density indicator of 50%. That ought to be the goal. The key is to keep improving. Now, if you're at 0% or negative 20% or 10%, you got some work to do.
Right.
If you're at 40%, 50%, 60%, as long as your expectations are set right, that's a pretty good place to be. With that, when I say 40, 50, 60%, that means you might have, 50% high performers.
Yep.
And maybe the rest of your folks are medium performers and no low performers. That would be a talent density indicator of 50%. That's a pretty good number. You're never going to have 100% of your folks being high performing for too long.
I'm intrigued about this topic in a number of ways, and in particular looking at generational expectations. Is through my experiences, people's attitudes towards work can be demonstrably different based on cultural background, based on age, based on demographics, etc. So this idea of somebody being a top performer or an underperformer or a low performer is so subjective. And I could have expectations that are here, but if somebody else's expectations are here, we're going to get a lot of cross communication. What's your take on this? How do we wrap our head around it?
A couple of things. Number one, it all starts with the senior leadership team being aligned as to where's the company going? What's the vision? What's the strategy? What's the plan? Right. What are we trying to accomplish 3 years from now, 1 year from now, or 10 or 15 years from now? If we understand where we're trying to go, and let's take the easiest team to measure, which is probably the sales team, right? This goes for everybody. Sales will be easiest to talk about. Well, if I know this year I've got to increase from, 40 million in revenue to 60 million in revenue, and I need my margins to go from 50% to 55%. Well, it's pretty easy to look at the 10 people on your sales team and come up with some honest measures that are going to get you where you need to go. I had a situation, a technology firm that I worked with for a number of years. We were assessing talent as a senior leadership team. They got really good at it, really accurate, great expectations. They said, we're now going to cascade this down through the rest of the organization, which I was a fan of. Let's do that. But they did it without enough education, without enough thinking about change management and how people were going to be protective. And there was a situation of this company at the time was going through a tough time. They had 3/4 of badly missing their sales goals. But somehow their sales team had 80% high performing folks. That math doesn't work.
No,
I don't care how you slice it. So the rest of the organization knew enough because of their goals and because they had documented what the goals of the team were, frankly, to call bullshit on that and say that just can't be true given where you are. So that accountability across the team, and I typically start with the leadership team, that's who I work with, that accountability to make sure, it's easy to say that it's easy to be in a situation where there are hard graders and there are easy graders.
Right.
And when I first started using this talent density framework, I would say very simply, everybody rank productivity of all your folks on a scale of 1 to 10. Rank culture fit on a scale of 1 to 10. And it's better than doing nothing, sort of.
Right.
But it was only when I got way more structured, I created way more structure with my clients that did two things. Number one, said, no, we're going to create very specific expectations, key performance indicators that say, for this head of finance or for this marketing analyst, here are the 3 ways we're measuring productivity.
Right.
And not just ways we're measuring, but here's the target. We need to see 10 new marketing qualified leads every week. So number one was knowing how to measure that and also knowing how to actually measure culture fit using their core values. And for each core value, are they a model of that core value? Are they just living the core value? Do they occasionally have problems? Do they frequently have problems? Getting to the point that you can actually measuring it and coming up with a framework that says they're a 10 out of 10, not if they're meeting all their goals.
Right.
They're a 10 out of 10 if they're blowing them away. They're not a 10 out of 10 if they're living all the core values. That's a ticket to the game, is living the core values. They're a 10 out of 10 if they're the Simone Biles of living,
right.
They're the LeBron James of living the core values. They've got to go over and above. And of course, no matter how you slice it, you're still going to have some people that are a little bit easier on their folks and people that are a little harder. But when you put that structure in place and the accountability across the leadership team, it's pretty hard to sandbag your goals or sandbag how you're evaluating your folks.
So everything to do with people being a high performer or a low performer is all dealt with once you can identify what good looks like.
Yes.
And that you can break that into as many specific KPIs or as many specific metrics as possible that I know, they know that this is where their expectation is. And therefore you can know whether they're above or below the line.
And the only thing I'd add to that is those measures you're putting in place. There are measures related to productivity.
Yep.
And there are measures related to culture fit.
Okay.
Those are both important because someone could be, I had clients say to me, what do you do about a high performing jerk? And my answer is there's no such thing.
Correct.
If they're a jerk and they're hurting the people around them, they're not high performing. So you need not just the productivity measures, but the behavioral culture fit measures.
So both, and we need to know what good looks like both sides of that line, and then people know how to be able to indicate where they are on that progress report too.
Absolutely.
I'm still confused though, right? So you're running a business. You have high performers that have been part of your team for a period of time. The business has grown, the business evolved. And now what was once upon a time somebody's high performance is now the same performance it's always been, only your expectations have now changed because the field of play has changed. What do you do?
I think you said it in the question, which is as your business is changing, and that's always the case with the clients I work with, or they'd never hire me if they didn't want to grow and change the business. But as your business is changing, your expectations are changing. What was once great performance is now barely acceptable, right? And that could be the same measures, but now you expect more.
Yep.
Or it could be we've taken the business in a new direction and now the measures change. So you absolutely, there's a great book by Marshall Goldsmith. What got you here won't get you there.
Yeah.
And that's the message. And by the way, in your question is one of the biggest issues I've seen in leaders. And I just had a situation, really tough situation like this with a client of mine where someone, and I'm talking about somebody at a very senior level in the organization reporting up to the CEO, someone who 5 years ago was kicking ass. 5 years ago was doing more than they needed to do, helping the company get where they needed to go. But 5 years ago, they were a $15 million company. And now they're a $50 million company. What got you here won't get you there.
Yeah.
That same person. Now, there are folks in the organization that when the organization went from 15 to 25 to 35 to 50, there are people in the organization who grew along with the organization. Thankfully for the team and thankfully for me as a coach, the CEO grew along with that. The CEO is a totally different person than she was 3-4 years ago in a good way. But there was a member of the team that couldn't grow along. And by the way, that problem lasted longer than it should have because it's really hard to take someone who was such a big part of your team and so important to say they just don't fit anymore. They're never going to get us where we need to go. We have loyalty to people. Like as much as we can talk about numbers and KPIs and all this stuff, it makes it sound like it's all about the numbers. These are human beings. Mm-hmm. It's not easy to make some of the tough decisions. But when I have clients that are not moving forward out of this idea of loyalty, I help them understand that it's a very misplaced loyalty. Number one, are you more loyal to this one person than the 150 other people working in your organization, or the clients who very much want to get value from what you do, or your own life, are you more loyal to that one person than everybody else? And here's the other thing people don't see. If you've got someone in your organization that is underperforming, trust me, they're not happy. They know it. They're not happy. You're not happy. I truly believe that everybody's got the ability to be a superstar somewhere. When I do presentations, I normally stop and say, everybody's got the ability to be a superstar. And I ask people if they agree. And I get people throwing tomatoes at me because it's just pie in the sky crap. That's not true. But then when I say somewhere, maybe in a different role in your organization,
right?
Maybe in a different organization. And if we realize that, and I do believe that's true, I have a son that's got Asperger's syndrome. And I remember hearing a story way back that stuck with me because of this, that there was a high-tech firm that only hired young adults with autism to do the computer testing of their code because they were so good at the repetitive, obsessive nature of testing something, way better than you and I could ever be at doing that. I run screaming from that room. So I do believe everybody has the ability to be a superstar somewhere. And by keeping people around who just can't do it at your organization, you're not only hurting your organization, you're actually hurting them. Mm-hmm. They may not know it or admit to it at the time, but you're hurting them as well.
You mentioned Marshall Goldsmith's book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, right? I'd say today it won't even keep you here.
True.
Right? It is where we are as fast as pace as the world goes on. So
there's no such thing as treading water. Right. You're swimming or you're drowning.
Right. So what do we do with these underperformers then? If you have underperformers, okay, we don't want them on board the boat anymore. Let's be real and practical. You've got loyalty. We're humans. We have heart. These people are part of our organizations. They're part of our DNA. We care about them. What exactly do you do when you realize you've got people that are key people inside your organization that are quote unquote underperformers?
Well, we've got to start with understanding there are two different types of underperformance that I alluded to earlier. There's the low producing underperformer who's good culture fit, good attitude, all that stuff, but just isn't closing enough deals, or they're not getting enough marketing qualified leads, or they can't close the financials on time. Whatever it is, they're low producing. Yeah. That's one type of underperformer. The other type of underperformer is a low culture fit person. Yeah. So with the low producing person, what you're going to do, not rocket science, where are they underproducing? And you're going to coach them. You're going to work with them. How could you teach them, coach them? Okay. And try to get them where they need to be. The other thing you might do with the underproducing person is change their role. You've got a salesperson who is unbelievable at building relationships. They walk in a room with 20 people, they walk out with 15 best friends, but they just don't seem to have what it takes to close the deal. Well, is there a business development role that's just about building and maintaining relationships of strategic partners who are going to funnel you business? They may go from low performing to high performing overnight if you change their role to leverage a strength. Now, you can't always do that. Sometimes they're low producing in an area that's core to what they do, and a role change just won't work.
Yep, or you don't have a role to move them to.
Then for that situation, and I'm going to have something similar to say for the low culture fit folks, I believe, and I'm kind of a hard ass with this. I set a high bar for my clients, is I think a leader has 90 days to work with that person to make significant progress on it. And what I tell my leaders, and by the way, the only difference with low culture fit is you may be quicker to pull the trigger on a difficult decision, and a role change is not going to help there. 9 out of 10 times a role change is not going to help there. But either way, the model I use, and I role play this for my clients when I first start working with them, is Phil, you've got a low performer. And I actually do something called a quarterly talent assessment with my clients, where we're talking about this in a room with all the senior leaders. And I say, Phil, you've got this person who's underproducing, or they're not a culture fit. What are we doing? Are we coaching up or coaching out? And let's say your answer is, really believe in this person. I'm going to work to coach him. Phil, that's great. But this is a quarterly talent assessment we do. Yep. So we're going to be back here 90 days from now. If that person is still underperforming and you still think they need more coaching, you might be the problem. Mm-hmm. Now, are there situations where you might give somebody 4, 5, 6 months to turn things around? Of course there might be. Someone might be a bad culture fit today because they've got some problems at home. They're going through a death in the family, or a divorce, or an illness, or whatever it is. And we're human beings. We hired them. That they deserve our care and trying to help them. So are there times where it may go longer than that? Sure. But I've seen way more often people going years keeping underperformers around, that I set a high bar and say, look, do you think you could fix the problem in 90 days? If you can't, we've got to work together to make a much more difficult decision that's right for everybody, including that underperformer.
How does this conversation go, Mike? How do you bring it up to somebody? I think there are people listening to our conversation right now that know that they need to have some of these conversations with people in their life. And how do you bring it up? What do we need to consider if we're to have these kind of conversations?
The first thing before you bring it up is you need to make sure you have set crystal clear expectations for that person. And one of the things that happens, and to me, this is leadership malpractice. I get I just get a pain in my gut when I hear this, is I will say, so Phil, are we coaching this person up or coaching them out? And you say, well, coaching up. And I say, well, how long has this problem been going on? It's been going on about 9 months. Well, what do you mean? Then why do you still think they deserve coaching? Because I haven't really talked to them about it yet. And that happens way more often than you might think. And not only have they not talked to that person about it yet, which is the part of the leadership malpractice part, but that person actually thinks they're doing a pretty good job.
Right.
And that's because no one has set expectations with them. So it's got to start with something I call a job scorecard, which is for any role within an organization. Sales is the easy one because of how measurable it is. But for any role within an organization, your team members need to know how productivity is measured. Your team members need to know how you're looking at culture fit. So number one, it's got to start there. So if you've got someone you think is a low performer and that's not crystal clear, that's the first thing you've got to do. Make that clear.
Right.
Once it is clear, then you've got to sit down and have that difficult conversation and sit down and not say, you're a C player here, labeling someone is real difficult, but you can tell someone, hey, our expectations, that you're an accounts payable and our client or you're an accounts receivable and our clients are supposed to be paying within 30 days and your average is 60 days and you're also not playing well with the sales team. And so you've got to get real specific about what you're not seeing and very specific on what you need to see and try to make it, it's almost easy these conversations are never easy, but it's easier to make it a dictatorial conversation. Phil, here's what you're doing. And what I need to see is I need to see you do this. And you're going to do this and walk away. And maybe you got the ability, maybe you don't. But if we make this more of a conversation, and I'm truly curious, as to whether you understand the expectations, and curious as to whether you believe you can get there or how to get there. So I might say, Phil, you're here. I need you to get here. Be honest with me. What do you think? Well, forget the be honest with me part. I think it's never a good thing to say.
It's a terrible thing to say.
So edit that out of our conversation. Now leave it in, but that's not the right thing to say. But I want to know, hey, Phil, as a company, we need to see you get here. Do you think you can make that happen? What help do you need from me to make that happen? I want to make it more of a coaching conversation than you need to get here, okay, and then we walk away, and 90% of the time it can't happen, or you may not even really understand what I'm trying to achieve.
It's important to me that we zone in on this a lot, because I think as coaches, as leaders, as trainers, that we all have underperforming individuals inside core areas of our life. I think there is a level of competence that once you get to the heart of the conversation, you can find out whether you're coaching them up or whether you're coaching them out, or whether there's a difference in direction to be able to get to. The puzzle that I believe that most people struggle with is, how do you start this conversation? How do you go from, I've identified that ABC person inside my life is less than performing at a level that I need them to. I need to bring this to their attention in an environment that's conducive with us getting a forward result. Like, let's get into the details on this.
It starts before the conversation.
Okay.
And of course, I already said it starts with making sure expectations are set, but put that aside. It starts before the conversation with an attitude. If I know I need to sit down with you to have a tough conversation about your performance, if I believe you are dumb and lazy,
right,
and or you don't care, I don't care what I say. That conversation ain't going too well.
Agreed.
It's not going to go well. But if I make sure that I have an attitude before that conversation, which is something I call the law of positive intent.
Yep.
Which is that person who is underperforming. And by the way, underperforming could mean, they're not living your core values, which could be very frustrating, and they could be wreaking havoc in the organization. But I don't believe I've never met anybody who wakes up in the morning and says, what could I screw up today?
Right. Nobody's trying to do a bad job. Nobody's trying.
Now, by the way, if we are not careful as leaders or just as human beings, we absolutely believe that. I run into people all the time, and if I'm not careful, I believe they are purposefully trying to throw a wrench in, purposefully being. But if you step back and really think, and you say, wait a minute, everyone, and I truly believe this, everyone is just trying to do the best they can with the resources they have.
Okay. So if I believe in that first, right?
If I believe that going in, what it causes in me is it causes me to get curious instead of angry and frustrated. So it's got to start there, as you start with that attitude. And then I think you've got to, again, before the conversation, understand what's your goals in that conversation.
I'm still missing a point though here, Mike, right?
Yeah.
Assuming best intent, let's say that the person that is underperforming is Sally. Like, how do we even get Sally to the conversation? Because you and I can chat right now, and we are in chairs across the way in a conversation in a podcast studio. But for many of us, our underperformer is the other side of the country and connected via a Slack channel. The other person is in a cubicle in the other part of the office building. The other person is somebody I manage, but I see them in a weekly meeting, and that we show up in the cadence of our day-to-day. But there isn't this natural moment where we're necessarily going to bring up this underperformance. So how do I even get it on the agenda of the person that I want to talk to them about the
first thing you've got to do very simply, and by the way, this is the same for I believe it's the same for any difficult conversation you're going to have, is you start, I'm going to use the term asking permission.
Okay.
Now, if it's someone on your team and you need to have a difficult conversation, I'm not suggesting they have the ability to say no. But what I'm saying in the idea of asking permission with any difficult conversation is me saying, hey, Phil, there's something I need to talk to you about. Do you have some time right now? Or do you have some time later this morning? And by the way, when you do that, if I said that to you, you know right away from the words I'm saying and from my tone that we're not talking about the weather. There's something going on. So it's got to start there. And as simple as that sounds, with that asking permission, hey, something I need to talk to you about. Do you have time now? Do you have time a little later today? That first step is so important because to your point, and to you keep whacking me over that and say, all right, Mike, I get all the pre-stuff. How do we start the conversation? That's a conversation we often put off, not for hours, but for days and weeks and months and years. We put off that conversation.
Review or like this.
Don't get me. And by the way, annual performance reviews are the worst invention ever created in business. And if someone listening to this says, that's why I do it 4 times a year, you do a crappy process 4 times a year.
Just repeat it.
So I'm all for that. But it's got to start with this simple act of asking permission, which is just a way to build some momentum. It's like, it's like the gun going off at the starting block and you start running. But it's got to start there. And then what I would suggest is once you're sitting down to have that conversation, you don't start with your opinion.
Okay.
You don't start with, it seems to me like you don't really, you're not really passionate about what we're doing around here. I believe you start with the facts.
Okay.
Because what you want to do is you want to get as far into the conversation as you can without defensiveness playing in. And if you start by judging someone, I would get defensive right away if I was on the other side. But if I start and I say, hey, Phil, remember when we set your goals for productivity at the beginning of the year, we agreed that you were going to bring in $30,000 in new business a month. And we also agreed it was going to be at 55% margin. And looking at the numbers, and we've talked about this, you're barely bringing in 15, and even for the 15 you're bringing in, it's at 40% margin.
Right.
Not 15. I'm going to start with the facts, or if it's more behavioral, right? Instead of saying, I feel like you don't respect, my opinion, I might say, I noticed in this morning's meeting, you interrupted me 3 different times when I was trying to make a point. Right? Now, if I judged it, you're going to argue with me, but you probably not going to. Now, you might say, well, I didn't mean to, or that's okay. But we start with the facts and then go from the fact to what's the impact of that, or what is it causing? And the impact could be it's causing me to feel a certain way. It could be, and when you interrupt me like that, it causes me to believe that you don't value my opinion. Or again, back to the sales numbers, the fact that you've been missing your sales numbers by half and you haven't come to me to ask for any help. And when I've offered help, you have told me you're taking care of it. It leads me to believe that you may not be taking this as serious as I'd like you to. Once I start with the facts, I can get into a little bit of a judgment, a little bit of impact. And at that point, we can have a much more productive conversation and hopefully get to the point, especially if I believe in your positive intent and I'm curious and I'm asking you questions versus whacking you over the head. Hopefully we can get to the point that we can collaborate on a next step moving forward.
Okay. We just wrote a process, Mike. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-part process about how we can have tough conversations with underperformers. You want to know what it is? Because this is yours.
Okay, tell me what my new
this is your process.
My new difficult conversation. This is my next book.
Yeah, it's assume positive intent. It's ask permission to create the moment. It's start with the non-negotiable facts. It's then have a same page audit to make sure we're on the same page. It's then explore feelings, thoughts, and beliefs about outcomes. It's then collaborate next steps.
Whoever said that, other than you. Brilliant.
Just listened to what you said. But what I was thinking as I'm listening to you put this together from an underperformer, I'm putting it through another audit that says, well, what if this is your top performer, your best performing individual in your team? And I want to throw this back to you and say, does this still work? Could you assume positive intent that this person would like to achieve more, be more, receive the relevant recognition towards the performance that they're getting? Can we do that? Is that a good place to start, even with a top performer too?
It is. Not only is it a good place to start, but I believe, and I have seen, most leaders overinvest in their underperformers and underinvest in their overperformers.
Okay.
And the reason I bring that up is because what we tend to do, especially if we have a lot of low performers, you're one of my high performers. I could say, thank God for Phil. He's doing great. I don't have to worry about him. I can focus on my problem children over there. That is not how you want to be treated. And by the way, that's not how I'm creating a great company. So what I need to do is spend most of my time with you. And I know back in my days when I did write performance reviews and I had big teams, I had my hardest and my most difficult time writing performance reviews for my best people. Mm-hmm. Because for my underperformers, all I had to do was say, of the 12 things they suck at that they need to improve, I got to filter it down to the most important 3 because I don't want their heads to explode if I tell them they got to improve in these 12 areas. But for the people that worked for me that were smarter than I were, that were awesome, what am I going to tell them that's going to help? So one of the most important things is to make sure you have a set of actions which is going to result in some of these same types of conversations that aren't really difficult conversations, but they're high stakes conversations. But you need a set of actions like, challenging them, increasing their responsibility, re-recruiting them, making sure they never leave, having a career plan.
They are still difficult conversations. And I think what we do is that we shortchange them because we say, good job, you're so, we throw cheap compliments at them. And what I'm learning here in this discussion today is this same formula works for a high performer. I can assume positive intent in that they want more. I can ask permission to create a moment because as much as they might be crushing it, I can equally say, hey, Mike, I love everything you've been doing. It's important, though, that we sit down and have a conversation about just how far you've come. When would be a good time this week for us to be able to have that conversation? Right? I can schedule that moment. I can start with the facts. I can say, well, it's been 7 years that you've been inside this company. And I know that when you started, what you hoped to achieve was blank, blank, and blank. And just 12 months in, that what you'd already managed to achieve was blank, blank, and blank. And since that period of time, what you've gone on to achieve is blank, and blank, and blank, and blank. And at this moment in time, you're our number 1 at this, and you have a customer satisfaction score of this, etc. I can label the non-negotiable facts because in the same way the underperformer might find excuses towards it, the high performer will often bat off, oh, it was nothing, I'm just doing my job. They won't accept the level of success that they are delivering. And you can get to that same page audit, right? You can get to that same page.
And by the way, it's not just, and I love what you're saying, I agree with it 1,000%. And it's not just about making sure you're sitting down to let them know they're doing a great job. The whole point of it is, let's talk about what's next.
Well, and that's where we get to here, right? So we get to the same page and we say, everything that got us up to today, are we in agreement that that is all true? And they can't help but deny it. But then you do the same thing here. You explore the feelings, thoughts, and beliefs that impact the outcomes, but through the good performer. It's like, how do you think I feel about how far you've come?
I had a situation many years ago. I had, in between management consulting and coaching, I had one real job.
Yep.
For 3 years, I worked for a footwear and accessories company. I worked for the CFO, and he was giving me my annual performance review. And it was page after page of bureaucratic nonsense that goes in a performance review. But he didn't fill it out. All he did was write on the first page, keep up the good work. I knew at that moment that I had to find my next job. I was 30 years old.
Yep.
I didn't need keep up the good work. I needed someone to coach me through what's next. How do I get better for myself, for the company? And we may, as a leader, you may not think of that as a difficult conversation because one of your best people, you don't think about it as difficult. But I would say whether you call it difficult or not, it is a high stakes, critical conversation.
100%. And this final step of collaborating the next step, if I was to rewrite the keep up the good work statement and phrase it as a meaningful question, I think a question that every leader can have in this given environment is where do we go from here? On either side of the line, right? Where do we go from here?
Which includes where do they want to go in their career and how might I help them get there?
And it's never ending. It's a never ending journey, right? Where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? And now you ideate and then you assume positive intent and then you ask permission to create the moment to be able to have a meaningful conversation that is going to help manage the next level of performance, whether that's cultural or physical performance. And then we start with the facts, and then we have a same page audit, and then we explore the feelings, thoughts, beliefs, and outcomes that can come as a result of those facts. And then we ask, where do we go from here?
And that circles all the way back. We close the circle to now, expectations have changed.
Right.
And now you've raised the bar on expectations. They've got different responsibilities or a new project or the same responsibilities. We've just upped the game. I don't need to bring in 30,000 anymore. You've been kicking butt. I now need to bring in 70,000 in revenue. Comes way back to the expectations we set and then evaluating performance, and the cycle goes on.
Right. And the same could be true with the conversation you have with yourself about your fitness performance. The same could be true with how you manage the relationships inside your family. The same could be true inside how you manage the...
Although I tried to set productivity expectations for my wife, and she wasn't real happy with that.
You failed the same page audit? The same page audit was where we...
we didn't even get that far.
So you stated the facts and they were disagreeable, and you didn't create the moment. Wrong assumption around intent. Got it. Still trying to break the process, Mike. This is good. I believe that what you've just created is the ultimate performance review.
Yeah, I hate to call it that.
I know.
The reason I hate to call it that is because I think, I like to use a sports analogy.
Okay.
Imagine we're about to head into baseball season.
Yeah.
Imagine waiting until the end of the season to tell one of your best hitters, your swing is off. You got to change your swing. That's why you hit 220 this year, with 10 home runs. Like, are you going to wait till the end of the year to tell them their swing is off? Okay. No, when they, either after that at bat or after the game, you're going to sit down, show them the video, have a conversation with them. And so I don't care if the performance reviews are quarterly, if they're annually, if they're monthly. You need to have those conversations at that point in time. I also believe you need to, I'd say about half the leaders I work with have regular one-on-ones with their people. Mm-hmm. Half. So half of them are not even doing that. But the half that are having regular one-on-ones, there's no structure to it other than, all right, we got a half hour for a one-on-one. What do you want to talk about? But if you could use those one-on-ones in a structured way for accountability and feedback, for coaching, now, not only are you giving feedback in the moment, but every week you've got a chance to give that feedback or set some additional goals. Then the whole idea of a performance review becomes ridiculous because you're doing it all the time.
But that's why this is the ultimate performance review. It's any place, anytime, anywhere, ongoing. Even in this conversation here is, I assume positive intent that you definitely don't want performance reviews to be done on a consistent, periodic basis. They're done on a needs must all the time type basis, and that you're anti the annual review doesn't mean that you hate the idea of this being called the ultimate performance review.
No, I still hate the idea of.
But you're going to rename this.
The word, you can call it that. The word, because of my 35 plus years of dealing with this stuff, the words performance review for me are like fingernails on a blackboard.
Right. So it's
going to take me some time to get over that.
So we're going to trust this process here a second. Can we have permission to talk about alternative names that could allow this to be able to have something that is more portable in a story from your end?
I like that.
Okay. So let's start with the facts. Is we have a 6-step process that can be used for positive discussions, negative discussions, sustainable discussions. We haven't found a conversation that this wouldn't be helpful for yet. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So we're on the same page.
Yes. I feel like I'm a witness on the stand.
Okay.
Wait a minute.
So what are your feelings and thoughts and beliefs about the term performance review?
I don't mind the term performance. I mean, performance is important. But to me, and the reason why it's fingernails on a blackboard for me is that word performance review, when it's used, has typically meant some periodic, once a quarter, once a year. So that, and it's just the history. There's nothing wrong with those two words, but it's the history in my head of what it has meant that says, I hate to call it that.
So it creates an incorrect assumption, and therefore you feel like it's doing something that is the thing you don't want to do.
Yeah, and I think it would create an incorrect, it's an incorrect assumption for me, but I think there are a whole lot of leaders out there that had the same experience. Okay. So when you use that phrase, comes with baggage that I don't want it to come with.
Got it. So it's the sort of visceral feeling that it creates in those words that I'm excited about. So if you're looking to be able to create a culture of performance being reviewed regularly without it being a calendar event, how do you phrase that typically in your conversations with others? Well,
the framework I use, I call it the talent density framework. And part of that framework is, there's a lot of parts of the framework, but given what we talk about, there are kind of two things that would would be relevant. One is the one-on-one conversation and a very specific structure for those conversations.
Yep.
Second part of that is the difficult discussions.
Right.
The third part of that, which is separate from the conversation you might have with your direct reports, is the quarterly talent assessment meeting, which is something that happens with your peers on the team. And if this is CEO and leadership team, then it's your peers on the senior leadership team, where you are not force ranking people. But what you're doing is, as a leadership team, at least once every 90 days, having a conversation together about all of your direct reports, holding each other accountable for coaching, developing, working with their people, and holding people accountable for making those tough decisions that they need to make. So it's part of it is the team having those discussions, and part of it is the work you do with the individual team member.
Okay. But what is this conversation called?
Which?
This performance review structure that you run through here. If we were to give that a label and give it a name, what could that be?
The conversation itself?
Yeah, these steps of being able to help people navigate the underperformance or overperformance of individuals within their team.
To me, I think of it more, rather than a performance review, I want it more action oriented. Okay. So to me, it's more about, a performance plan or a development plan, and if I use the term plan, I'd want to make it clear this is not like we're creating a 5-year plan and in 5 years we'll review it again. It's an ongoing, living, breathing development plan.
Okay. So it's like a next steps development plan.
And that would work, obviously, for the lower performers, the higher performers, or those folks performing at a medium level who you want them to improve.
And anybody in any scenario, any time, we could develop a next steps development plan, which is a where do we go from here? But it doesn't start there. It ends there.
Right.
Which allows people to be able to write a new plan, to go out, live a new plan, and then create a new version of themselves in doing so.
Absolutely.
Mike, this is good stuff. This is good stuff. If kind of final question from me, if somebody has realized through our discussion today that they are the underperformer, what message do you have for them?
If they're the CEO, there may be a different message than if they're a member of the team. But at its heart, it's probably the same thing. I think, number one, if you believe you're underperforming, you've got to be honest with yourself about it. Right, you almost have to have that difficult conversation with yourself, and start with the facts. Start with positive intent, of your own positive intent. Understand the facts, and what you need to do is be vulnerable enough. And vulnerable is not a bad word. Vulnerable enough to ask for help. And even if you're the CEO, there are members of your team that can help you.
So it's a surrender to the right people.
Yeah, and it's not going. People. Well, I ask for feedback. Well, how'd you ask for feedback? I said, how do you think I'm doing? Well, no, like you had a meeting and you communicated the new vision of the company, and it's after the meeting going to someone who's a particularly good communicator and saying, hey, how do you think I communicated this? Do you think everybody understood? It's getting more specific and getting feedback. But I think the first thing is being vulnerable enough to ask for help and being honest with yourself as to whether you can get where you need to get. There are CEOs who come to a conclusion that they are not the right CEO for the organization. Maybe they were the entrepreneur and founder and made themselves CEO. But again, what got you here won't get you there. They need to be honest and say, you know what, maybe I need to step back, play chairman of the board and be less involved, and hire a CEO to run the day-to-day. It's all about being honest, being vulnerable, and asking for help.
Honest, vulnerable, asking for help. Mike Goldman, this has been fun jamming with me on this today, and I like what we co-created here. That was fun.
Yeah, well, that's my next book. We'll co-author it, and
I call it yours, my friend. I call it yours. Thank you.
This is great.